So, do you know you're going to die? Or do you believe you're going to die? Or do you think you're going to die? These fundamental questions need to be thoroughly examined and investigated to find out, you know, am I living with the awareness that I am going to die and it is certain? So, why are we talking about death, right? Why are we talking about death? It's because to kind of push away death, which is going to be inevitable for every person, you kind of push away being able to experience life fully. And the ignorance of not knowing that, we have a limited time here on this planet. And what we do with this time, it should be used in a meaningful, purposeful way. You know, we may use our time for selfish desires, selfish purposes, fighting with another person, arguing with this person, causing a whole lot of suffering for another, causing suffering for yourself. There's an endless game that is here and being played. So we're going to kind of go into a whole bunch of different spiritual teachings from different spiritual teachers over thousands of years up till today. And, I like to start off firstly, besides looking at these spiritual teachings, me finding out the truth for myself of, how actually awakening happened in this life journey. So if I go back to, the year 2021, right? I wasn't really interested in enlightenment and, you know, um, becoming awakened. None of that. My main focus at that point was to find out, what is beyond this life? Is there anything beyond this life, firstly? And what happens when death takes place? Those are the most fundamental questions. But what really shook me and, really took me to the pinnacle point was that I wanted to know for myself, that was there. But there was also something a bit deeper that was there that kind of propelled or pushed towards the awakening. It was knowing that I know absolutely nothing. Like, for instance, I can look at this object that's here, right? We know how to use the object. You may know how to, you know, use it for your survivability or, maybe a glass of water. You know what it's called. You know what it's called. You know how to identify it. You know how to use it, but you don't really know what it actually is, because whatever it is just the name. It's just identification. Somebody along the lines at the very beginning kind of made it up, said this is what this is called, this is how we use it, but you don't really know exactly what it is. And then what do I mean by not knowing what that actually is? You see, the whole entire thing of how the system functions is going to a point of, okay, everything that is happening in my own life experience, I am creating it, I am giving meaning to it, I am sort of translating all the sensations, the activities, events, responses that's there. They don't really mean anything, but I am the one that is sort of giving it meaning, giving it a purpose. And through this creation of what I am, making within myself, either I can suffer it or I can kind of enjoy it, and live in a blissful state or suffer and die. So, that not knowing is a very powerful thing, not knowing. And there's no way to know. And how do you know that you are in the state of not knowing, I don't know, is when you look at something, your mind cannot waver. It cannot kind of, your attention that's on it cannot move to anything else because you don't know what is, what's in front of you. And that kind of, I took it and, try to turn it inward. I don't know who I am. I have this name, I have this, educational background, you know, I have a history, which is, just the story of the character, but this is all created here. It's all temporary. So this is part of the changing phenomenon, which is always temporary, always changing. So it's not true, right? Something that is true, or I would say the absolute truth, that is unchanging, it's permanent. So that kind of led to, finding out, what happens when you die. And, before we kind of dig into that, I've created many videos on this topic. So we're not going to really dive into that there. So we're going to kind of dive into the real spiritual teachings. Yeah. So we're looking at a book, and I'll see if I'll put one of these, the sources of this in the description. I'll just put whatever is relevant here because, if you've been following this channel so far, the content is kind of repeated here and there. So we're looking at, a book by Avatara. It's called Beyond Shiva, the Absolute Truth. And, there's this one quote I'd like to mention. This is, I'm not sure which page. This is page 27. Yeah. This is the verse 5. It says here, be nothing. Be nothing is freedom. Being nothing is true joy. Be nothing. It doesn't matter if it doesn't make sense. Making sense is mind. Making no sense is mind. Being beyond the need of making sense or beyond the worry of not making sense or not making any sense is where you have to be. So, how is this relevant to the death? Even, the symbolism of, Jesus getting on the cross, dying there and then being reborn from that. So in life, before the spiritual awakening, everybody has to kind of get on the cross. And what is getting on the cross actually? What is this, the significance of that there? It's who I think I am as an individual, who I am walking around in this mask of consciousness, this false identity basically in the world, in the matrix, all these people are kind of, they believe they're the character that's in this entire simulation, if you look at it in a more modern sense. So we all kind of, come into this world with no identity. We create an identity, whether it's religion, culture, spiritual teachers, whatever. We take this identity upon ourselves and then we protect. Now, the ego is kind of designed to kind of protect this, because if it loses this, the game is over. The ego is kind of gone. So what you calling as yourself comes to an end, basically. So what is death? Death is the I, that which I am, that's here, that's created here. That I comes to an end. So in the second part of the book, which I read here on the page 27, the 6th verse, making the sense of the mind and stuff. The whole thing is creation by yourself, the mind creating everything. Without the information, like Yuji Krishnamurti once said, he said, you cannot experience anything without the help of the knowledge. So without the knowledge, there's no experience. There cannot be any experience at all. So that eliminates, and sort of kind of grounds the ego for itself. So we're not kind of like, in the beginning of the spiritual path, there may be an attempt to kind of kill the ego. So it's, you are the ego, basically. So you're trying to kill yourself in a way, not necessarily like the killing of the self, but this is more of like the false identity. That is the self that we're kind of, killing. Kind of, so that which we are which we truly are, that is permanent, can kind of shine through the consciousness mask, basically. And through that, realizing of what you are, when that kind of comes through, there is a sense of, what they call a salvation or samadhi, and what you truly are is kind of felt. So it's awakening from the dream of the illusion that I have created of, this whole entire experience, what I am, the limitations, and things like that. So next we're going to go to Adi Shankaracharya. This is from the Nirvana Shatakam. He mentions this very clearly, and it's a very beautiful composition. If you haven't read it, it's a very direct pointing, and it goes to the whole entire stages of, starting with the false self. I am not the body. I'm not the mind. I'm not the thoughts. I'm not the emotions. It starts off on a very subtle level like that, and it kind of goes very deeper, and it goes to a very subtle, even beyond subtle level, so that it kind of directly points to your true nature. And he says here, and when you read this, I advise that you kind of the Chitta Ananda Rupa Shivoham Shivoham, that is referring to not as Shiva as the deity, and in Hinduism how it is. This is mostly referring to that which is not. So what is that which is not? Everything that you can think of, you can feel, you can imagine, you can create, you can give meaning, that is what it is. So it's not that. So any concepts, any understanding, all of stuff, it's not that. It can never be that. So when you read the Nirvana Shatakam, it's basically, when you read it, it's kind of being perceived through the mind. It's not that. It can never be that. And even awakening is exactly the same way. There's no vocabulary. There's no way you can kind of, explain directly, okay, this is really what it is. So he says in this verse here, it's na me mrityu shanka na me jati bedaha pita naiva me naiva mata na janmaha na bandhur na mitram guru naiva shishyaha. What that means is, I am not bound by death. What is the I? That is referring to. That I doesn't die. It's a personality that dies. So it's that I that he is realized. I am not bound by death and its fear, not by caste or creed. And the second part is more important. I have no father, no mother, or even birth. So that is something that's very fundamental to understand. Yes, you may have a biological, parent here and there, but what is the I? That I is never born. It's kind of using the vessel of the body. The body has this biological relationship. The I is not conditioned by anything. That I is not limited by anything. So I have no father, I have no mother. I am not a relative, nor a friend, and even this one as well. Nor a teacher, nor a student. There's not any of this stuff. He's basically trying to tell you, if you think I'm this, I'm not this. If you think I'm that, I'm not that. And then he says, Chitananda Rupa Shivoham Shivoham. I'm the form of consciousness and bliss, the eternal Shiva. So what is referred to as Shiva, again, it's not the deity, not the god. It's just it's a perfect analogy to say that I am Shiva. That is, what you are. It's that which is not. So, this is a very deep realization that happens when you experience something called death, or awakening, for instance. So the awakening and enlightenment and death is it's the same thing, basically. So if you go to Rumi's quote next, dying before you die, And this is the exact same thing with getting up on the cross and dying there. Even in awakening, for instance, in order for awakening to happen, that which you are has to die. It has to kind of let go. The ego mind has to kind of drop. There has to be a dropping, a cessation of the whirlpool of mind, the activity, the samskaras, the cycles that keep on going endlessly. That has to fall away. That has to drop. The moment that happens, there can be this beautiful blossoming of this, what you are through that. Um, Rumi said it so beautiful, dying before you die. And, dying, it's kind of conceived as a negative thing. It has like a negative connotation. If you died once, right, before you actually have the physical death, if you die, and then the awakening is like kind of the physical death, because the awakening is what I'm talking about is not in the body. Right? People may think, okay, awakening through the body and stuff. No, it's not in the body. It's beyond the body and beyond that. So it's deeper. That is the true awakening. That is where the true awakening lies. It's not in the body. It's not out of the body. It's beyond or both dualities. That is where the true awakening actually is. And it's the absolute surrendering of the ego, and the shedding of the worldly attachments, and those can be very subtle things that one can actually do to kind of prepare for that to kind of blossom from within. Ramana Maharshi, this is I just did a quick Google search just to find out about his last words, because I looked into this many years ago. And some of the quotes I do remember, some of them I don't remember. I mean, after awakening, it's not really necessary, because all of them are saying the same thing. It's exactly the same thing. So it's just different words and language that's kind of constructed to kind of there's every single different types of people that may come and listen, but for one specific person, the words that are being uttered out from this vessel, it may hit, and it may align with something. So that's the whole purpose of me doing what I do. Not that I'm saying anything different or saying anything unique or I'm special. No, it's not. It's just an attempt. Somebody it may have helped along the way. Like, it's kind of helped me along the way. So that's why I saw, okay, there's some benefit to this. And Ramana Maharshi said this here. When his followers gathered, and his time of death arises, in his final hours, he is, the master now is kind of dying now. All the time the master was alive, they didn't get it, so now they want to get the the last word. It's a very common thing in the spiritual tradition. I think the loss kind of hits really deeply, and then there's a little settling of the ego, in that deep space. He says, yeah, they say I'm going away, but where can I go? I am here. Very, it just says I am here. I'm not going anywhere. He's saying, where can I go? And, when you look at this, you'll be like, trying to understand with the mind. If you look at, there's this direct experience of, if it ever happens to you, samadhi, basically. Samadhi is experiencing yourself as everything. There's no separation between what you are and what everything is. And because of that, there's no distance. So there's nowhere to go. Wherever you go, you're always here. You're always here, and you're always now, and you're always present. So it's not that, there's to achieve and grab. And there's a whole entire, dropping of that entire structure that kind of helps you hold, in your entire life. It kind of keeps you caged, and then awakening is just, the whole thing shatters, basically. So, we'll leave it at that. Ramana was, he played a big role in terms of the silence aspect. So I never ever went into silence. I've heard other spiritual teachers talk about it. It never really hit me. I never really seen the benefits of it until I heard about, Ramana Maharshi, and I tried it. And, the silence. I did it for 3 days, and I realized in that 3 days I can sit in silence. I don't have to utter a word. Everything that's worth knowing in the whole entire existence that I wanted for myself to kind of know it at that point. This was um, prior to awakening, and I think this was like maybe about a year or 2 years back, and just everything that I wanted to know just kind of just flowed, and just understanding on everything that the mind could try to seek for answers, because it's just the last phase before awakening is just the burning of all the questions. When the questioner stops asking questions. So yeah, let's look at Buddha's quote. He said, even death is not to be feared by one who has lived wisely. Then he says, on the acceptance, death is not the opposite of life, but part of it. And this is the exact thing I was going to kind of explain. I said, let me just read it further. You cannot separate yourself, separate and eliminate the process of death. In that, in that acceptance of dying, right? Living fully. Forget about dying. If you live fully, live with have a complete experience of life and live life to its max, the certain wisdom sets in. Like, okay, I've done everything. I've achieved what I want to achieve, and now I'm at a point where I am ready to die and leave this world. That there is a different kind of realization. It only comes to a person. It can come through ignorance. It can also come through achieving everything in life. But the one thing on the spiritual path is one must understand, irrespective of whether you have achieved everything or haven't achieved everything. You realize that I'm going to die. Every day you kind of remind yourself that. Be very conscious and aware and of that mortal nature of what is the I. That is, and that I which I am is going to die. So as long as you've not experienced an awakening state, you will die. And one of the questions I had was, what happens when I die, or when death takes place? Do I actually die and then there's nothing? And that is true. There is nothing after that there. What is awakening basically is that I, which is beyond the character of the ego mass self, that kind of awakens through. It's not really, the language is a bit of a barrier here. It's not really that it's asleep and then kind of awakes through the being. It's always awake. It's just that the ego mask, or you can look at it like the shell of an egg, kind of just cracked. That's all. The yolk and stuff was always there, basically. So let's look at the last one before the end of the video. This one is from the Bhagavad Gita, and Krishna speaks of two things, yeah, which I'm going to read. Well, I'll actually read more things, yeah. So on the inevitability, for one who has taken birth, death is certain. Like exactly what I was telling you at the beginning. And for one who is dead, birth is certain. UG Krishnamurti spoke of, the world mind. You can't kill it, and it's like the software that gets loaded onto each individual person that's kind of born. That software you cannot kill. Awakening is the absolute cessation of that software. Krishna speaks of the reincarnation. As a person discards worn out clothes and puts on new ones, the soul discards old bodies and takes new ones. That's in chapter 2, verse number 22. The previous one I read was in chapter 2, verse 20. So the one divine identity, this is the chapter 11, verse 32. I am time, the destroyer of worlds, grown immense here to annihilate these men. That was more the Mahabharata, Krishna enlightening Arjun basically on that battlefield. And, Jay Krishnamurti, he asks us, the Indians believe in something called reincarnation, but they fail to question what is that which reincarnates. It's not the self who you think you are. It is the consciousness which is beyond the self, beyond the mask, that plays different characters, different roles and stuff. So that kind of sheds the outer layer. So you are the outer layer, basically. You cannot really separate yourself from it. So, yeah. If you have any questions, feel free to drop it down in the comments. We can definitely look at it in another video, but I think we've touched on a lot of different aspects on this year. And, we're having a retreat. You can check the page, and if you want to join that, we kind of go very deep into this. This is just like a little introduction, basically. Yeah. Thank you for listening.